Hi, everyone. Welcome to this intro session on the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty for African Youth Activists. I'll share. Oh, and please mute your microphone. And we can get started. So welcome everyone to this intro session on the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty for African Youth Activists. That's brought to you by Fridays for Future Africa, Fridays for Future Kenya, Don't Gas Africa, Break Free from Plastics, and the Fossil Fuel Treaty. And we have the wonderful Kiki Tassi, who's doing interpretation for us to French today. So if you need to hear the call in French, you can click on the globe icon that's at the bottom of your Zoom screen and click French, and you can hear the entirety of the call in French. Alors, on a l'interprétation disponible pour l'appel aujourd'hui. Si vous avez besoin de l'interprétation en français, c'est Kiki Tassi qui va le faire. Vous pouvez faire clic sur l'icône du globe qui est en bas sur votre écran et cliquer sur français pour écouter tout l'appel en français. We're really excited to have you all here from different corners of the continent to dive into this session with you. So we would really love if you could introduce yourself in the chat, say your name, where you're joining us from, and the movement or collective or organization that you are a part of, so we can get to know each other better. My name is Seble, and I'm the head of Africa Campaigns and Advocacy for the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty, and I'm joined by an incredible group of activists and campaigners that will be sharing their insights about what are the roots of the fossil fuel treaty proposal, how youth activists across the world and in Africa are powering the campaign, how fossil fuels drive not only the climate crisis, but also the plastics crisis, and how you can get involved in the fossil fuel treaty movement. And then we'll open up the space for questions. Just because I can hear an echo, if you are not speaking, could you please mute your microphone just so everyone could hear each other? That would be great. So I will quickly start. And again, encouraging all of you, there's so many people here today, to just please share your intros in the chat. And I will just start by giving a very brief intro on the fossil fuel treaty. So give me 1 second. Please, if you're not speaking, please mute, and maybe ask my co-host if you can mute the ones that are really loud. That'd be really helpful. Okay. So can everybody who see my screen? We have some of our panelists in this photo too, so it's going to be fun. All right, so I will introduce our other panelists as they speak in the upcoming session that we have. So I think a lot of you are joining us from across the African continent today, where we've experienced so much climate breakdown. We've seen floods. We've seen, sorry, can you mute? Thanks. So we're joining from across the African continent today, where there's been such heavy climate breakdown. We've seen floods tearing through Nairobi. We've seen heavy rains across all of East Africa. I'm joining from Addis Ababa, Ethiopia today. There's been famine across Southern Africa. There's been so much climate havoc. And really, the climate crisis is truly being supercharged, and all this climate disaster that we're seeing is really being supercharged by three substances: by coal, oil, and gas, which drives almost 90% of all carbon emissions that have been unleashed into the atmosphere in the last decade, that are creating this climate chaos, and single-handedly also driving the plastics crisis, which some of the other folks will share today, because 99% of plastics come from fossil fuels. So we are working collectively to build a world that's free of fossil fuels, that's full of people-powered, abundant, renewable alternatives via a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty that we're going to dive in more with you today. So this is basically to think about the world that we're living in now. The world that we're living now is heavily unequal, and there are a few companies and the wealthy that are driving the climate crisis that we face today. It is not an equal crisis. The world's richest 1% produce almost twice as much carbon pollution as the poorest half, and it's only a handful of companies that are really responsible for the climate breakdown that we are experiencing today. And so if you look at the world, a lot of countries say we're climate leaders. We have our climate commitments. We're going to reduce emissions by this much. We're going to reduce demand for fossil fuels by this much. But at the same time, they create new gas pipelines. They build new gas power plants, or build new oil wells, or build new coal mines. And so what's happening is countries on the yellow line, these are the climate commitments. These are the climate commitments that they have on the yellow line. And this green line is actually what's needed in terms of reduction of fossil fuels in order to limit warming to a maximum of 1.5 degrees. So the gap between the climate pledges of different countries and what is needed is 110%. So that means between now and 2030, so only 6 years' time, countries are on track to produce 110% more fossil fuels than what can safely be burned to limit warming to a maximum of 1.5 degrees. We're already seeing the impacts that are happening, and this is expected to grow with ongoing fossil fuel expansion because there's currently no global mechanism that's actually reining in and managing the decline of fossil fuel extraction. And it's not enough to only stop new expansion of fossil fuel projects, although this is super, super vital. We also need to be phasing out the projects that currently exist because the existing coal, oil, and gas projects, they overshoot our carbon budget. And this is not only coming from activist spaces, from environmentalists, etc. This is also coming from mainstream energy modelers and energy agencies like the International Energy Agency, which has called for no new investment in fossil fuel supply in our net zero pathway. This is also echoed by Antonio Gutierrez, who is the UN Secretary General, that said that investing in new fossil fuels infrastructure is economic madness. So we've seen these calls from very high spaces, from the streets, from all over, but this is not translating into a concrete framework or policy to actually end fossil fuel extraction. And we want the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty to really fill that gap. So what happens if there is no global agreement on fossil fuel production? Well, that's the world that we're currently living in today, which means that every single supplier or fossil fuel producer will want to be the last barrel sold, will want to squeeze out the very last drop of oil. It makes any transition away from fossil fuels inevitably so much harder, and it puts us at risk of having stranded assets. So putting money, public money, into infrastructure projects that actually never get their return on investment. It creates risks to workers and communities that are part of the fossil fuel economy because they enter into precarious economic situations with economic chaos and an unpredictable sector. And it delays the expansion to renewable energy, which is much cheaper than fossil fuels. But currently, the vast majority of subsidies are going towards fossil fuels and not towards renewable energy. And so we can't diversify our economies away from this dependency in the current scenario. It also continues to grow the power of fossil fuel lobbies and constituencies to infiltrate our politics and our policies. And it brings us to a world that is dramatically too hot to be able to continue with sustainable life on our planet. And for this continent, for Africa, it's meant a lot of stranded fossil fuel assets. I was saying, putting money into projects that don't have their return on investment, deficits in our government expenditures that could go towards addressing healthcare, education, but instead are leading to deficits, inflation, massive unemployment. And I wanted to share this map of the African continent in terms of fossil fuel extraction. This is a map that I often share when presenting the Fossil Fuel Treaty, because I want to show just how much the African continent is being carved up for fossil fuel extraction. So I want to share that we've had decades and decades of fossil fuel extraction in the African continent. And despite that, there's 600 million Africans that do not have access to electricity. This is even the case for major fossil fuel producers on the continent, like Nigeria, which is our biggest oil producer. Nigeria is home to over 85 million people that don't have electricity access, which is over 40% of their population. And they export crude oil, they import 100% of the gasoline that they need. And so Nigeria is considered the country with the largest energy access deficit in the world. And then we have a country like Angola, which is the second largest oil producer in sub-Saharan Africa. And yet 50% of the population doesn't have access to electricity, and they import 80% of the fuel that they need for their country. So even major producers on the continent, major fossil fuel producers, have not managed to achieve universal energy access for their people. Africa is in fact home to 75% of the world's population that doesn't have access to electricity. So it's a global energy poverty hotspot. And it's the only continent on Earth that has had the total population living without access to electricity increase since the year 2000. And why is this happening? This is this is happening by design. This is a foreign dominated extraction sector. Over 60% of the fossil fuel industry operating in Africa is run by companies that are headquartered outside of the African continent. So you can think about Total, about Shell, about BP, about Eni, how much they're eyeing the continent for their extraction. They're taking that wealth out of the continent. And the energy itself is also destined for export. For example, in the gas sector, over 90%, in fact, it's 93% of the current gas projects on the continent are for export. So this is not energy or wealth for the continent. It's all being extracted and shipped out. And this has been accelerating. And over 70% of the projected oil and gas projects are at risk of becoming stranded assets. So like I was saying, putting money, public money, into fossil fuel projects that don't kind of fulfill the whole length of their project lifeline and don't give the return on investments that was needed. And so they don't give the economic returns that was needed for the country or its people. And currently there's disproportionate amount of finance going towards fossil fuels compared to renewable energy. The G20 is financing 4 times more money to fossil fuels than they are to renewable energy in Africa. So you can see in the left picture how much our continent is being carved up. This is decimating our people, leading to so much violence and conflict. And it's not providing any wealth or any energy for our people, because we have the biggest global energy poverty hotspot in the world. We're shipping our energy out, we're shipping our wealth out, and this is being extracted by foreign companies. And Dean is going to speak more to this later, but I just wanted to highlight sort of the campaigns and movements that are kind of coming out in rejection and resistance of this extractive model for our continent, like Kick Total out of Africa and the Don't Gas Africa movement that Dean will share more on, because denouncing really this continued plunder of our continent for foreign companies and encouraging an alternative model and a just way forward. And when we look at our continent in terms of renewable energy, it's actually the continent that is endowed with the highest renewable energy potential on Earth. This is the huge kind of yellow circle that you see on the continent of Africa is our renewable energy potential. And the blue dot is the renewable energy, the energy demand that is expected up until the mid-century. You can see that the renewable energy in Africa is higher than any other continent on Earth. It's around 40% of the global share and around 60% of the world's best solar resources. But this potential has not yet been able to be tapped. And why is that? Because there's specific elements that are necessary for such a transition to be possible. We need international cooperation that's grounded in justice and equity. We need finance, and we need technology transfers. This graph shows the dependency that different countries have on fossil fuels and for their national revenue. And so we can see African countries like Chad, Nigeria, Algeria, Angola, Congo, that have up to 60% of their national revenue and economy coming from oil. And they have very low GDPs per capita. And then you have countries like the UK, Canada, the US, Norway that have very high GDPs per capita, and they're not so dependent on oil, even though these are the countries that have brought us to the climate crisis and emergency that we face today. So in the theory of change of the fossil fuel treaty, it's these rich Western countries that need to fund and finance a transition for the most dependent countries, and also these Western countries must phase out their fossil fuel extraction first and fastest, and give the technical and financial support to the most dependent countries to be able to transition to the abundant renewable energy potential. We've also had kind of research with our partners at the Civil Society Equity Review. Sorry, everyone else that is co-hosting, can you please mute the speakers that are having a lot of noise? Because thank you. So with our partners at the Civil Society Equity Review, there have been developed science and equity-based phase-out dates for each fossil fuel that look at how much does the fossil fuel contribute to national economy, to job creation, and to energy supply. And all of these scenarios know that finance is required for that transition, and to do so, we need international cooperation, which is kind of the theory of change behind the fossil fuel treaty. And you're probably thinking, okay, why do we need this if we already have the Paris Agreement? The Paris Agreement is vital in terms of setting the climate crisis on the international agenda and making it such a pressing issue that no one can ignore. It brings consensus around a lot of countries to the table, sets the 1.5 degree target, and it also creates the loss and damage fund. So it's a vital piece of climate legislation and an important framework. But there is a really big omission from the Paris Agreement in that there's no mention of fossil fuels, no mention of coal, no mention of oil, no mention of gas. And as I said before, almost 90% of the carbon emissions this decade come from fossil fuels. So we find it dangerous that the main cause is not present. We wonder, how can you actually address a crisis if you're not naming the cause and tackling the cause? And this is a message from our chair of our organization, who is flagging that COP28 was the first time there was any mention of fossil fuels in the end document of the climate negotiations. That took almost 3 decades, and we cannot wait another 3 decades to actually address this crisis. So what we want is for the fossil fuel treaty to be a complementary mechanism to the Paris Agreement. And I know that Nana is going to share more about the Global Plastics Treaty. But we also know that the fossil fuel treaty can complement the global plastics treaty, because 99% of plastic comes from chemicals that come from fossil fuels. So by stopping fossil fuel extraction, we can both address the climate crisis and the plastics crisis in a complementary way. So now you're probably wondering, okay, what is this proposed fossil fuel treaty? So we're grounded in 3 different pillars. We have a pillar on just transition. So that means helping countries move away from their dependency on fossil fuels, having alternative development pathways, getting technology and finance for the transition to be possible, having proposals around debt cancellation, around taxation of the super wealthy, to be able to diversify their economies, have renewable energy deployment. And there's a pillar on non-proliferation, so no new fossil fuel expansion anywhere, nor exploration into new reserves. And a pillar around a fair phase out. So taking into account who has caused this crisis, these wealthy northern nations, to stop their expansion first and fastest, and then give finance and technology support for more dependent countries from developing regions to be able to transition. This proposal has now been supported and endorsed by over 2,000 civil society organizations in almost 120 countries around the world. And we invite you from your different youth movements also to back this call for a fossil fuel treaty. The text for the fossil fuel treaty itself hasn't been written yet. It's grounded in the 3 proposals that I shared with you, and the countries that will bring this forward to really kind of flesh out exactly what it will entail. But for now, it's grounded in those pillars around a just transition, no new expansion, and a fair phase out of fossil fuels. In addition to the thousands of civil society organizations, there's been over 9 indigenous nations, more than 100 cities and subnational governments on every single continent that have backed the proposal for a fossil fuel treaty, over 500,000 individuals, 800 parliamentarians, and thousands of scientists and academics. And in addition, there's been over 100 Nobel laureates, thousands of health professionals, almost 500 faith leaders, and thousands of youth activists around the world, which is what we're going to focus on today. And the proposal has been backed by 12 nation states, which will bring this proposal forward to have a legally binding treaty. But we want all the grassroots pushing to make sure it's really of the most progressive and radical proposals possible to really fairly transition away from the fossil fuel era to energy sovereignty and democracy. And I think Laura will dive into this more after me, but there's been more than 2,000 youth activists around the world who have backed the call for a fossil fuel treaty, calling coal, oil, and gas our generation's weapons of mass destruction. So we also invite you to become signatories to this call, and I will share the link in the chat. So this is my contact information if you have any follow-up questions. But I also encourage anyone who has questions in the meantime to put your questions in the chat, because we'll have a bunch of time at the end to interact with everything you want to know more about. So thank you so much. I'll stop sharing my screen now. And I see that there's more people who have joined, which is wonderful. And I'm going to pass over to Laura, but let me introduce her first to all of you. So Laura and Laura is also part of the Fossil Fuel Treaty team. Oops. Okay. So Laura is a youth organizer and Latin America campaigner for the Fossil Fuel Treaty. She is an eco-feminist organizer and communicator from the Andean Native Peasant community in Combita, Boyacá, Colombia, which has been organizing against mining and to restore Native culture and wisdom. Laura has organized previously with Fridays for Future and Pacto por el Clima in Colombia, and she has a master's in education, gender, and international development from University College London. So she's going to share more about the youth space with the treaty and how all of you can get involved and some of the demands. So I'll pass to you, Laura.
Thank you, Seble. I was like, it is 7 a.m. here, so I didn't look at the group at 4 a.m. when you asked for the presentations, but they're pretty simple, and I'm gonna speak slow also for the interpreter. Wait, share screen. You seeing this? Yes.
Yes.
Oh, present. Wait. I don't know how this works. So you're seeing this, yes?
Yes.
Okay, yes. So thank you, Seble, for that presentation. I'm gonna go through this presentation. You have said some of the things that I have already have here, so I have like deleted it. But yeah, just to start with, I just wanted to share like this illustration of like a more youthful visual, oh my gosh, my computer, visual identity that we have from the youth space. Wait, I'm organizing this. Wait, because I want to see some people and I'm not seeing anyone, and I don't like to talk. Yeah, okay, yeah, no. So yeah, like this is like some of the changes we have done in the youth space to the treaty identity. That is like in the youth space we feel as like our own thing. But yeah, like I'm gonna just start the presentation. Seble already has said this, like the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty has 3 pillars: the non-proliferation, ending the expansion of any coal, oil, and gas production and infrastructure, a fair phase out, and a just transition. I'm working as a youth coordinator also with C. C is from Ireland, and as Seble said, I'm from Colombia. And I'm also like very into Latin American campaign. So I can share like some of the things from Latin American experience through this. I want to share also with you, we have, oh wait, you're seeing my WhatsApp? No.
No, we're not.
Okay, I just want to share with you this link where you will find the website of our youth space. These are some of the things that we have done. This is an example, the fanzine, or the scene in English, I think, which is a compilation of the things that youth people think about the fossil fuel industry. unlike the fossil fuel language. Because one of the things that we have tried in the in the in the in the youth space is like to put in easy words, in words that we can talk and we can present the issue, or not only of the climate crisis, but also like of the all the impacts that the fossil fuel industry has done to our territories. So please check that website. You will find this scene, other pictures, and you will find also the petition that Seble mentioned previously. The youth space has three aims. The first one is to connect people, youth people working globally against the fossil fuel industry. The second one is connect people already working on the treaty in their local and international context. And the third one, the idea is not only like to share experiences, but also to engage people in the strategy development of the treaty, of the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty. Just to explain a bit more, the like to develop maybe each of the goals. So the first one that is regarding the connecting youth people globally, the idea is like especially like me being from Latin America, one of my aims is like people from all Souths, from Latin America and Africa, for example, we share experiences and see how we can complement each other, and like not to be mediated maybe by like Eurocentric or North-centric dynamics. The idea is like we started to connect in our own processes, in our own projects, in order like to have like a more South strength. The other one that is connecting people, young people working already on the treaty initiative in their local and national context, is, for example, to share experiences also in how that working with the treaty has been in each context. So, for example, I'm from Latin America, and like the message that we have in Latin America and the impacts of the fossil fuel industry and the aims that we want to see in the future, like the changes, are very different, I guess, from Africa. And at the same time, like me from being from Colombia, it would be like a very different perspective from someone from Chile, that is another country in Latin America. So the idea of this space is precisely like to share those perspectives of people already working on the endorsement of the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty. Another thing is also like to take into account, like, of course, the treaty, you can work on the diplomatic scene, or you can also work on the more like territorial, like, and like grassroots, yeah, like platform, I don't know, space. So the idea is also like to share those two paths, and maybe to see how they can connect of people that are doing here and there. So we can also connect those two levels. The last aim, this is like a pretty good example of this is, for example, we have a steering committee, and like there are youth people participating in the youth committee, in the steering committee. And the idea is to bring not only people working, for example, I don't know, only on Fridays for Future, but also like on other groups and collectives and organizations to be involved on the development strategy, on the more like global messaging of the treaty. So like there is not only like a NGO perspective, but also like the youth, and especially the youth from the Global South perspective. So that's another aim we have with the youth space. And yeah, I think that's it, because otherwise I will repeat things. The last thing that I wanted to say to you is, I'm just copying this here. Please visit the website. I'm gonna share here in the chat the link to the Telegram group because we have an international youth space. We have also a Latin American WhatsApp group because in Latin America works better WhatsApp than Telegram. I don't know, Seble, like if there's already a regional group or like the idea would be like to have one after this call. Or I don't know if you have thought about it, but like it's just like things that we can start to think on working more on a regional level as a youth. And the last thing also, like this is our email, youth at, I'm gonna show it also on the messaging and the messages in the chat. This is our email. You can connect with us there. We would love also to hear like some of the projects that you have, because the idea is also as youth coordinators to support you somehow with connections, with resources, with time, with experiences, with the grassroots projects that you're leading on like different parts of Africa. So if you have something, it would be very, very nice to get to know it and to connect and to see how we as youth coordinators can support and be that bridge with the treaty, and like the network that the treaty has also can serve to us. And yeah, I think that's it. I don't know, Seble, if something is missing.
No, that's perfect. Thank you so much, Laura. And if you have any questions for Laura, you can put them in the chat, and she won't be able to stay the whole time, but I can share them to her afterwards. And if you have any questions, everyone in the meantime, feel free to put them in the chat again, because we'll have time for you at the end. I'm going to pass now to Rahmina, who is going to talk about the importance for the fossil fuel treaty in Africa and different youth strategies to call for the fossil fuel treaty in Africa. And many of you probably know her already, but I will introduce her nonetheless. Rahmina Paullete is a young climate activist, environmentalist, and wildlife conservationist from Kenya. She is the head campaigner for Let Lake Victoria Breathe Again, which advocates for the restoration of Lake Victoria. She is the founder of Kisumu Environmental Champions, and she is a youth coordinator at Fridays for Future Africa, a passionate climate activist at Fridays for Future, one of the coordinators at Climate Life, a treaty champion for the fossil fuel treaty, an ambassador for Climate Clock, a sustainable food system advocate at COP, a member of the Water Working Group in Yongo, and a climate change champion at the Wangari Maathai Foundation. And maybe I'll leave it there, and then I'll hand over Rahmina for you to present to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Seble, for the amazing introduction. Well, it's quite evident that Africa is highly susceptible to the adverse impacts of climate change, including severe droughts, floods, and extreme weather events. Well, it's very important to notice that while reducing fossil fuel dependency, it's really crucial to mitigating these effects, which can devastate communities and ecosystems. A great example is Uganda, which is currently under the EACOP, the East African Crude Oil Pipeline, and some of the places such as the Okavango Delta, which constantly have issues with the displacement of people just because of the fossil fuel extraction. But at the same time, it's really devastating to know that actually the fossil fuels are really harmful to our society, that has a lot of issues with our health, economic stability, environmental degradation. So I really feel like, as the same way that our African leaders and many youths who think alike, they really think that it's important for us to shift into clean energy, which has a lot of benefits. Just to mention, with the health, the burning of fossil fuels contributes to significant air pollution, which is linked to respiratory and cardiovascular diseases. And in many African countries where the air quality is a growing concern, which affects millions of people, while transitioning to clean energy sources can improve air quality, leading to better health outcomes and reducing healthcare costs. The same as with Africa's reliance on fossil fuel markets, which are notoriously volatile, which can lead to economic instability like fluctuations in oil prices, which has severe impacts on national economies. And I think by investing a lot in renewable energy and clean energy, Africa can create really a more stable economic environment and foster job creation, at the same time building resilience against the global market shifts. Well, all of us, we're all thinking, is it possible for us to shift from fossil fuel? Well, it is possible for us as Africa to shift to against the fossil fuel. Well, actually, this is through having more alternatives and equally making sure that we have much more investments, especially since we are one of the continents with the greatest impact, and with many population of youths who have actually been affected by the climate crisis one way or the other, it's important for us to engage together and to collaborate in order to make sure that such initiatives like the Fossil Fuel Treaty is kept on the front while discussing both in the conferences such as the SB, which is currently going to be happening in June, that will be discussing on the negotiations at the same time with the COP, which will be discussing on our future and working towards shifting into transitioning to 100% clean energy. And I think for us as youths, we have the greater power to make this difference. And I could just say for some of the ways that I believe that has worked for us, especially FFF Africa, Kisumu Environmental Champions, and the Fossil Fuel Treaty, one of the ways is towards using social media as a powerful tool for organizing, mobilizing, and educating people, such as the platforms like Twitter, can be Instagram, TikTok, which uses to share information, to create viral campaigns that will indeed create too much pressure in order for our governments to actually be encouraged to take in their own initiatives in the different governments, might be subnational, might be national, so that they can be able to include the Fossil Fuel Treaty and to make sure that the fossil fuel extraction in our communities are actually going to be cancelled. And that means that we'll be getting justice for the biodiversity, for environment, and also for the people. Another way that we can actually actively involve in terms of calling for the Fossil Fuel Treaty in Africa, which we can do, is educating people on the ways that they could engage, creating awareness campaigns that would leverage the information that needs to be taken into consideration while talking to the communities that have actively been involved in issues that are critical towards sustaining a sustainable future, by having community workshops and educational programs that will further on widespread the public support and hopefully will influence many leaders to adopt policies and strategies that will help in terms of endorsing the treaty and making sure that we shift equally, and at the same time making sure that we all in line with what's happening. And since we are all trying to make sure that by 2030, we make sure that the green energy is actually met up, the carbon emissions are not exceeding, as right now we are having these issues with the climate crisis impacting our infrastructure, our economy, our health, and basically deteriorating the future that we all once dreamed of or once had. So I think as one of the examples that I think many of you might have seen on social media, how we've been doing a lot of protests and campaigns, such as the recent one, which we had, the global climate strike, where we appreciate the Fossil Fuel Treaty for supporting most of the chapters, including FFF, FFF Kenya, FFF, other FFF, and also people such as the Fossil Fuel Treaty, Non-Proliferation Treaty, such as me, in supporting communities in order for them to have such campaign strategies and protests to call for the end of the fossil fuel extraction, and making sure that we use different forms of awareness, such as climate strikes, art installations, and online campaigns that will garner more attention, even through the media coverage that makes sure that we highlight the urgency of these issues and demand for immediate action. Well, from Fridays for Future Africa, we've had a lot of countries such as Angola, as you had mentioned, that is one of the countries that is actually suffering the most from the fossil fuel extraction, the same to the Okavango, which I would like to also highlight one of the most activists that have been really vocal on the ground, who's called Ina Maria. She's also part of the Fossil Fuel Treaty. She's been really vocal in terms of making sure that her community is represented both internationally and locally when speaking against these companies such as the Total Energies that are taking advantage of our communities and taking our lands and making sure that we all suffer at the end of the day, instead of shifting into something that will not harm any of us, since right now many of our animals are becoming extinct, many people are becoming displaced, and this is something that it can be easily preventable if we all stand together, both of us, African leaders, also the people on the ground, the communities, the policymakers, and the negotiators. Well, this is through having more partnerships and including the CSOs and the NGOs that are moving forward towards transitioning together and actively participating in steps that are really crucial. Well, one of the things that also in my organization, Kisumu Environmental Champions, we believe in is intersectionality and actions on the ground, such as the action for climate action. Well, actually, since for us, we are from the Lake Victoria community, we suffer a lot from the plastic pollution, which is one of the greatest concerns that we face within the East African region, Uganda, Kenya, and Tanzania. And if you know very well, plastics are actually petrochemicals, and they also come from fossil fuels. So we always try our best to make sure that we reuse the plastics, we tell people how it is harmful, and we also try to ensure that we link, because fossil fuel is a big issue for us. So I think it's quite important that all of us are taking steps and becoming more innovative, using technologies, using also resources that would help us in terms of setting the pace towards climate action and encouraging more young people to take part and not to be left alone. So I think the changes starts with me and you. The differences starts when we start together collectively or individually. So I really tell people over here, most especially the youths, I encourage you that we can actually support organizations and also initiatives such as the Fossil Fuel Treaty by adding our voice and making sure that the leaders are held accountable. The companies that are taking advantage of our communities need to be set on the pace and need to be told the truth that you guys need to stop what you're doing in order for us to get justice for the earth. So that's why I am calling upon each and every one of you here on the Zoom call, if you could be able to just go to the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty social medias, you can find the link towards endorsing in the treaty. So it just takes me and you to make a difference. So let's not waste that time and call for action. Thank you so much, Seble. I'd like to pass it on back to you.
Thank you so much, Rahmina, for sharing. And I will just bring us back to the room. Yes, thank you so much for everything you shared. And I will just put the links also for what you were mentioning. If you want to sign the youth letter for the youth call for a fossil fuel treaty alongside 2,000 other youth activists, you can do so on the link that I just put in. And then if you want to do so on behalf of your organization, on the homepage of the website, which is the link I just put down, you can scroll to where it says endorse as an organization and join, again, over 2,500 organizations that are supporting the call for a treaty. Now I am going to pass over to Orieny, who is the National Co-Coordinator for Fridays for Future Kenya, to share how Fridays for Future Kenya has been mobilizing for a fossil fuel treaty. Orieny is a Kenyan climate justice advocate and campaign organizer. He's a co-founder and partnerships lead of Mazingira na Jamii Africa, and currently consulting for Y Labs as the regional facilitator. In addition, he advocates for climate justice, as I said, as the national co-coordinator of Fridays for Future Kenya, and his advocacy extends to the international stage as he's managed to attend a number of conferences and negotiations, such as COP27 and 28, the INC3 on plastics negotiations, and UNEA 6 as a youth delegate. And Orieny is also part of the global youth team that's organizing the Bonn Climate Camp that's set to take place during the SB60s in Germany next month. So I will pass over to you, Orieny. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Seble, for an amazing introduction. And hello, everyone. Thank you all, my fellow Africans, for joining this call, and Laura too. So I'll start by, everybody knows what Fridays for Future Kenya does, but I'll just say briefly that it's a global youth movement that was started in 2015 by Greta to give voices to young people so that we can demand for and fight for a better future that we know we deserve and our future generations deserve too. So that's what we do. We want governments to do better, leaders to do better, but we also demand the same of ourselves as activists. So I'll start with the Fossil Fuel and Proliferation Treaty and why we are supporting this campaign. Personally, as an individual, I feel like the treaty is not just good for the world, but is really good for Africa because it gives African countries and the other developing countries across the world an opportunity to sign the treaty first and talk about the agenda before it's hijacked. And that's why I've been trying to set up meetings with Kenyan leaders, especially the Minister of Environment and Nairobi County government, to talk about this and to see how they can endorse the treaty. Last month we organized a march here in Nairobi to raise awareness on the treaty and why it is needed, and we combined that march also to campaign for a strong and ambitious plastic treaty in Canada during the INC3 negotiations. These two treaties are like sister treaties because plastics are produced from fossil fuels, and if we want to cut off the tap, we must phase out fossil fuels, and we can't do that. We can't beat plastic pollution if fossil fuels are still being produced. Majorly, what I advocate for and what Fridays for Future Kenya right now is trying to look at and is trying to focus on too is how to bring all campaigners together to combine forces, combine our networks, and to join forces. Is unity in strength and unity in numbers. That's why all Africans, Seble thought that it would be a good idea to bring all campaigners, all young activists across Africa to this intro session to introduce you to the Fossil Fuel and Proliferation Treaty. One thing that I noticed while we were mobilizing for this session is that most young people in Africa are ready to dismiss the treaty even before learning what it's about. So I have been asking them to keep an open mind and to read through the Fossil Fuel and Proliferation Treaty, hear what it's trying to champion for, and to see how they can converse about it in a more constructive way, and also to contribute to the campaign, if collaboration or through active campaigning, even better. As Fridays for Future Kenya, we organize on multiple fronts. We've been campaigning for years for loss and damage fund, Fossil Fuel and Proliferation Treaty now, and Fossil Fuel Finance has been running now for some years, and we'll be joining the Africa Development Bank March that is happening this Saturday here in Nairobi with Power Shift Africa and other organizations to still campaign for the same. We want the Africa Development Bank to 100% finance renewable energy and to divest from gas, coal, and other fossil fuels. In as much as we as Africans want to believe that fossil fuels are good for us, we look at countries that have been producing fossil fuels the major producers, look at Nigeria, Angola, those countries, the people have electricity shortages, yet they produce fossil fuels in large quantities. So at the end of the day, we must ask, who is benefiting from these resources that we have as Africans? If it is not us, then why should we venture into them? Also, another thing is to look at the rational and logical side of development. We can't say that we are committed to the Paris Agreement, then we continue investing in fossil fuels. So these are conversations that I believe as Africans we need to have. That's why Fridays for Future Kenya applied to organize or host the local conference youth, the Kenyan Local Conference of Youth 2024, together with Society for International Development and other partners, which will be happening maybe in late July or late or early August. Well, we have not yet decided on the date, but we plan that during this LCOI, the Fossil Fuel and Proliferation Treaty, and conversations on just transition, renewable energy, sustainable development are going to take center stage to see how we don't just campaign, but we also talk to policy makers, we talk to negotiators who are in the Climate Change Directorate and who are part of the Africa Group of Negotiators but are Kenyans, to see how we can submit our recommendations, how we can talk to them, understand why they make the decisions that they do and why they're not putting us first, and keep demanding that they put us first. To add on that, the Breakthrough from Plastics campaign has been a campaign we've been engaging with. Personally, I've engaged with it for years now, but from last year, we had a more central role to play during the NC3 campaign. That's when we came to be educated more on how the two treaties, the plastic treaty and the fossil fuel and proliferation treaty, can work together to see how we champion for both these treaties, not separately, but as one entity. Yes, the goals are the same and we can work together. I think I have said too much and I'm going to pass the mic back to Seble. But before that, this Saturday we are hosting a screening. There will be one in Kisumu, there will be one in Nairobi, then one in Mombasa. Reach out to us and let's see how you can be part of it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Orieny. And yes, we will share more about the upcoming screenings at the end of the call. And Dean, also feel free, since you'll be speaking next, if you want to plug anything about the film, that's super welcome. So next I have the honor to introduce my friend Dean, who is Dean Bhebhe, who is the coordinator for Don't Gas Africa movement and the campaigns lead for Power Shift Africa. He is a PhD candidate at the University of Witwatersrand and a 2018 Mandela Rhodes Scholar with several years experience building and implementing campaign strategies across Africa. And he's going to share with us the connections between the Fossil Fuel Treaty campaign in Africa and a lot of the resistance movements on the continent, like Don't Gas Africa and Kick Total out of Africa. So Dean, I will pass to you.
Right, thanks, Seble. Hi, everyone. Pleasure to be with all of you. So essentially, from all the presentations, clearly we've got a massive fight, right? And we're pushing back on fossil fuels and we want renewable energy. But the biggest question is, how does this all make sense and how do we hold our governments accountable, right? That we don't end up in an extractive model, particularly in the future. And that's where the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty comes by. Essentially, it's not just a clarion call, but really a mechanism where we can hold our governments accountable and really get that commitment for them to transition away from fossil fuels. I have no idea why I use that language, but really a fossil fuel phase out and really a renewable energy phase in, essentially. So it's really more over like transparency and accountability mechanism that could essentially provide developmental pathways for individuals like us who are in the global south in Africa, essentially. And one of the amazing reasons, essentially, is because obviously we're living in a world where we have 600 million people without energy access and close to over 1 billion who are inhaling toxic fumes every day from dirty cooking sources. So through the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty and it being operationalized, we are ideally calling for an immediate halt to the expansion of fossil extraction and advocating for a swift and just transition away from the current production of oil, coal, gas in Africa towards renewable energy for all, people-centered energy system, which is why it's important to drive that support, which is essential for communities on the front lines of exposing extraction efforts, with already being part of a community and a continent with unparalleled solar and wind resources. Africa can really fundamentally fulfill its energy needs through renewable energy sources that are not only just sustainable, but they're community focused and environmentally friendly. And that transition to 100% renewable energy framework through the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty should be able to prioritize what we like to call energy sovereignty and democracy, which is a way of encouraging local and diverse ownership. And through this, we want to recognize and operationalize this through international cooperation, finance, and technology transfers, which are all essential for all of us to realize this transition, right? And massive growth in financial investment into renewable energy is required, right, in order for Africa to address the severe underfinance that the continent has historically suffered. So really this approach and this idea of really merging our fossil fuel struggle with the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty Initiative aims to really try and synergize our efforts. And this approach really aims to move away, from the monopolistic tendencies seen in the past of fossil fuel-based energy systems, and to rather a new version to ensure the protection of humans, land, indigenous rights, and especially concerning the extraction and the use of critical minerals becomes very important in this discussion, right? Because Africa's vision must include, if we are going to actually fund that transition, Africa's critical minerals in order to enhance that value, in order to foster intercontinental connections and support the continent's development through local manufacturing and utilization, to say the very least. And it's under this spectrum where we then oppose the existing energy paradigm that perpetuates inequality, where the energy infrastructure is developed, owned, and operated for the benefit of a select few, systematically excluding significant portions of the population, especially those in impoverished and rural areas, from accessing energy. And for those that always ask the question, maybe Africa does need fossil fuels to develop, there's so many examples, right, where we can actually allude to the fact that fossil fuels haven't promised the economic prosperity and development. We can look at Mozambique, for example. When gas extraction started 5 years ago, it was to actually combat 70% of individuals living without electricity access. 5 years later, in 2024, that number is still at 70% living without electricity access, right? The life expectancy as a result of fossil fuel extraction in Nigeria is 41 years old. If we look at the marine ecosystems in Senegal, over 80% of individuals have been left food insecure because of the deteriorating marine ecosystems caused by oil and gas extraction. So there's a big literature around why fossil fuels does not essentially work in Africa. And be very much happy for us to continue that discussion in terms of really understanding what we mean by the right to development, right? But then it is a question of, can Africa be positioned in a way where we actually have a say in our own future, in our own energy systems? And in that discussion, how do we create a sustainable, prosperous system that can unlock developmental pathways? So through all this work that we do, we've got the Don't Gas Africa campaign, which has emerged into the Don't Gas Africa movement. We've got over 700 CSOs signed up to that campaign, and we would love to have each and every one of you on this call. I do see some of my co-facilitators on the call, like Smith from Nigeria, Ashley from Laudito C movement, obviously Seble. She's been such a great big supporter for this campaign, which is really a coalition of different CSOs across Africa who've really come together to prevent Africa from being locked into fossil gas and other dangerous, dirty, obsolete, or inappropriate energy systems. And under this idea, we are opposing, elite energy collusion, which is the collaboration by economic or political elites, often between developed and developing countries to dominate rather energy resources or systems and extract and appropriate and accumulate rents, wealth, and other benefits arising from them, which is then been a breeding ground for energy appetite, right? Which is a system of segregation and discrimination in which energy systems are built, owned, and operated to benefit a small elite group in society in a way that systematically denies energy access to large segments of the population, particularly to poor and rural communities. Which is why through this campaign as well, we're looking at combating energy autocracy, energy agency capture, energy destruction, energy theft as well, right? Which is the direct appropriation of energy sources for the use of other means other than those of benefiting the citizens. And even under that umbrella, right, we can even allude to renewable energy itself, because there was a time, when, there was a big renewable energy project in the northern parts of Kenya, in Turkana. And because we do not have that just transition lens, that climate justice lens, that people-centered lens, that renewable energy model, which was meant to benefit the people, actually left thousands displaced, right? And it became a situation where we recreated another extractive model, to say the very least. So quite a lot to go around, but I'm happy, and I want to leave it here so that we can have more time to actually dive into the critical questions that you may all have, because I do know that when it comes to fossil fuels and also understanding the treaty initiative, there are a lot of more questions, than answers, and we're happy to provide that space for you all. So thank you so much, Seble, and really keen on getting to connect with you all again. Back to you, Seble.
Thank you so much, Dean. I love hearing from you every time. And I think at the end, when we talk about the film screening, I might give you just a space to share more about what the film is all about. And I'm hearing from a couple people that the French interpretation is not working right now, which we do need to be fixing. So Kiki, if you can hear us, I just want to make sure your audio and everything is working, just so everyone who speaks French is able to hear. So I've tried to message you, and hopefully we can get that sorted so that everyone can hear in French. And now I'm going to go to our last speaker before we open up the space for questions. And our last speaker is Minta, who is from the organization GAYO Ghana, and also youth activist from the Break Free from Plastic movement. And Minta is a figure in social impact, youth development, and climate advocacy with a background in environmental science. He has over 5 years of experience in youth empowerment and program management, focusing on circular economy, climate mitigation, and adaptation through nature-based solutions. And as the UN Earthbeat Challenge 2021 champion for climate change, he's a recognized climate advocate. He is a senior youth ambassador for Break Free from Plastic, and manages the GAYO Eco Clubs, at Green Africa Youth Organization, impacting over 5,800 young people. And he leads the Youth Climate Connects research and development program, promoting environmental sustainability and zero waste communities globally. So I will pass over to you, Nanam. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Seble, for the introduction, and it's really an honor to be with you all here. And I must say, it's really an exciting platform for us to deliberate and equally share our insight, for us to understand the various public crises as far as the Fossil Fuel Treaty is concerned. So today I'm just going to talk about the issues, how the plastic treaty is equally interconnected with the Fossil Fuel Treaty is interconnected with the plastic, and how best we can address these things collectively in an essential way for us to fight towards a sustainable community. So one thing before I start, I think last year I once met a colleague who is also an advocate, and he was actually defending that plastic is not really related or has nothing to do with climate change, and equally with the fossil fuel. And I told him, if you have that kind of idea or that kind of knowledge, then I think you are missing out. So I'm really honored to equally share the same insight with you all, what I shared with her with respect to the life cycle of plastics, for us to really understand and understand this whole thing. So I would like you to actually post or share the picture I shared with you the last time, so that we
I'll
can
do that. Thank you.
we
I'll
can
do that.
equally follow the whole idea when it comes to the the life cycle of plastics. So with respect to this, I know possibly you used a plastic material or possibly a single-use plastic today, probably yesterday or last week. And I want you to picture that item that you used, all right? I'm going to tell a story so that you know how it was created and where it will be ending up in such manner. So with respect to that, I want us to understand and acknowledge the fact that the life cycle of that plastic that you used possibly today starts its life in the depth of the earth. And that's a fact, where fossil fuels like oil and natural gases are extracted. So with respect to this, the extraction actually is a process where energy intense, all right, is equally used, where environmental destructiveness and all that are equally or equally comes in there. So this often actually leads to habitat destruction, oil spills, and significant greenhouse gas emissions. And we have to acknowledge that. So once these fuel or fossil fuels are extracted from the earth, right, they are transported to the refineries. And we know that transportation or the vehicles used equally uses fossil fuels, right? So here, these fossil fuels undergo complex chemical processes to create the building blocks of plastics, which are the polymers. So if you have time, you can read more about the polymers, the ethylene, and then the ethylene and other components which actually add up to make or form the whole plastic thing. So at this stage, there is a high emission of more pollutants contributing to air, water contamination that adversely affects surrounding communities. Often those are already marginalized, all right? So in terms of environmental degradation, in terms of health, they actually contribute to this whole thing massively. And that's one thing that, again, we must acknowledge as at this stage. So the next stage is, the fact is, these petrochemical products, all right, are shipped to factories where they are molded into various plastic items which you use possibly today, all right? And we have to acknowledge that, with the addition of additives into for them to form the plastic thing that, or the single-use plastics, right? So in terms of that, the manufacturing phase again involves substantial energy of consumption, furthering our dependency on fossil fuels and equally amplifying the carbon footprint. All right. So when this whole phase is done, there is another step, which is the plastics are being created and equally they are distributed globally. All right. When they are distributed, we consume them. Possibly you did the same today. All right. And eventually they are disposed inappropriately to the landfills. All right. So despite people actually preaching about recycling initiatives, we can bear to the fact that only 9% of these single-use plastic or plastics in general, since the creation of plastics, only 9%, all right, have been recycled. And this doesn't really give so much, shall I say, that kind of hope for us to live a sustainable life in all. So with respect to this, these things end up in the landfills, incinerators, where people think that waste to energy is the solution to that. And it has its own problem with respect to that. That's why Global Alliance for Incinerator Alternatives, GAYO, is equally fighting against these incinerators. And also, troublingly, they equally affect our natural environment, all right? So this is the whole thing. And with respect to the plastic that you use, possibly someone, I think I asked one of a very young person, and I asked him, how long do you think this plastic that you're using will last in the environment? And this person said, possibly 1 week or something. I was like, are you serious? All right, we use it just for some few seconds, and then they last over 500 to 1,000 years. And these things, when they degrade or they break down, they turn into microplastics, right? Which is equally infiltrating our ecosystem and even our food chain. And researchers have actually been done on that. These microplastics are found in our bloodstreams. And it's equally creating a whole lot of health risks to all living organisms, including yourself, including myself, including the aquatic environment. All right, so this is how the plastic that we are using is equally related to the fossil fuel. So if in mathematical terms, I can say that fossil fuels is directly proportional to plastics, and that's a fact. All right, so why does polycrisis demand our attention? All right, when I say polycrisis, I'm actually referring to the simultaneous occurrence of multiple interconnected crises, amplifying the overall impact that we are equally facing. And I must say that we may talk about the plastic menace or the plastic pollution, but it goes beyond the normal things that we are seeing. I don't know if you have actually had interaction with the waste speakers, equally with people who are directly impacted with this whole plastic issues, especially in the landfill people. When they have to go to school, they end up being at landfills, more like scavenging for things that will equally affect their health in all right? So in our context, I would say that polycrisis of plastics and fossil fuels manifests in as a vicious life cycle exhibiting climate change, all right, environmental degradation, and equally our public health issues, just as I made mention of. I made mention to this issue to a friend that mostly our health sectors, I'll use African for example, our health sectors are not ready to handle certain, are not even ready to handle certain things. So why do we actually create another problem to become another problem within a different sector for us to start a whole conversation again? And Ban Ki-moon made mention of a solution to one of the SDGs is a solution for. So why don't we equally focus on solving these issues rather than trying to solve it in a way that will actually create another problem for us to start a whole form of conversation again? So the time is now for us to really appreciate this whole thing and appreciate the fact that the health impacts of plastic production and waste are very severe. Sometimes people are prone to chronic diseases, and people are prone to cancer-causing diseases and all that. And there's no solution for these things. So it's high time that we have to acknowledge that fossil fuels are equally promoting this whole plastic pollution stuff, and there's high time that we end or support the plastic or support the fossil fuel treaty in off as to equally turn off the tap, just as Japheth made mention of. So moving on, communities living this whole petrochemical plants suffer high rates of respiratory diseases, just as I made mention of, and microplastics are currently found in our water, food, and are equally linked to various health risks, including hormone disruptions and micro and chronic illness. All right, so I would like to talk about the fossil fuel treaty as a comprehensive solution for us to equally turn off the tap, for us to live a sustainable life, just as the earth, we borrowed it from our future generations. We didn't inherit it. One thing that I know is once you inherit something, you return it in any shape that you want. But once you borrow it, you have to return the item in a good shape. So we have to do the earth in such a way that it will be in a good situation where we can return it to the future generations and tell them that we received it from you, just as our forefathers received it from us, and we are giving it to you in that good conditions, just as we received it. So in all, we have to equally support this treaty and in a simultaneous tackle for us to actually tackle this whole thing from the grassroots or the root itself. Without fossil fuels, people may say that the raw materials for plastic production would diminish, yes, naturally curbing the proliferation of plastic products. And one thing is, this would lead to a significant reduction in plastic waste and pollution, equally reducing the pressure on the ecosystems and equally improving our health. All right, so ending my whole talk, I want to equally encourage all of us here as plastic campaigners or stopping fossil fuel campaigners, as our focus has often been on managing plastic waste and promoting recycling. While these are important, I believe that they are reactive measures, all right? So we need to support this treaty in such a way that, because it equally allows us to adapt proactive measures and stance where we can equally address these whole issues from the cause or from the source. All right, so as activists or advocates, we have to address this whole plastic thing, this whole treaty, in a way that we are not just fighting against plastics or plastic pollution, but also we are contributing to a broader battle against climate change and environmental injustice. All right, it's something that people are equally doing. They do all the distraction, and the people who are equally vulnerable, in fact, suffer all the consequences. Just as you know, Africa, we contribute less than emissions, is less than it's not really significant. By the end of the day, we are the ones who are vulnerable, and it's high time that we start doing more and not doing what we used to do. all right, just doing the talks, but equally getting involved within this whole conversations about our future. And so we are aligning our efforts with a global movement to secure a substantial and equitable future for all. So to conclude, I urge all of us to consider the broader application or the implication of our work, that every little thing that you are doing today equally sums up to become the bigger thing for us to achieve this fossil fuel treaty. And so we have to support this fossil fuel treaty and equally amplify our impact by simultaneously addressing multiple environmental crises. Just as I made mention of, a solution for one is a solution for all. So if you are doing it multiply, we can equally come around to actually solve this whole problem that we are facing. So let's unite our efforts, leverage on collective power, and push for a future free from this, the stronghold of this fossil fuel. Just as this program, a lot of organizations came on board to make this happen. So that's how we have to do it. I told a friend that if you think that this climate movement or this fossil fuel, stop this fossil fuel thing, if you think you are the only person going to bring the solution or handle it, your neck will break. So it's high time that we come to the collective to solve these things. And I believe that together we can drive meaningful change. Let's make the fossil fuel treaty a cornerstone for us to, as activists, to work and towards a sustainable future, so that the future generations do not hold us responsible. So let's be active and let's make sure that our words are true. I know certain activists or advocates who speak A and later on they do B. Let's not do that. Actually, it puts people from that kind of becoming or being in the space. Let's be honest to ourselves. Let's be true to the whole thing that we are equally pushing for. And I believe that we'll definitely get there. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Nana. Minta. It was very helpful and inspiring to hear the connections between the plastics crisis and fossil fuels, and also why plastics campaigners should get behind the call for a fossil fuel treaty that ends the expansion of fossil fuels and therefore cuts off the tap for plastics expansion. We only have, unfortunately, a few minutes left before we close, and there's already been some questions coming into the chat. So I am going to just read the first one I saw on the chat. And Dean, if it's okay, I wanted to direct it to you and I can also comment on it. The question is from Teddy, who has asked, do you think stopping fossil fuel exploration and its use in Africa and developing countries will slow our industrialization process?
Thank you. Thanks for the question. You said the question was from who?
Teddy, I don't know which country Teddy's from. Maybe you can tell us in the chat, Teddy.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Thanks. It would probably take me 3 hours to answer that for you to fully understand, but the answer is no, it won't slow down the process of industrialization. Particularly, I think we can start off with the question around the systematic and structural traps that Africa has been historically been embedded in. So, for example, we can look at Nigeria.
Par exemple, nous pouvons prendre un exemple de
when they are exporting crude oil, that oil is not at a stage when it can be used commercially, for example. So they sell that to
lorsque, par exemple, nous exploitons les produits.
So they export them to terminals across the global north, and because they've got refining capacities, they're able to refine that crude oil in order to generate other necessary aspects that we need within the energy system. So your diesel, your petrol, however you want to look at it. And obviously it's sold back to Africa as a refined good, but because we don't trade in US dollars, for example, we have to then convert, for example, the Nigerian naira in order for us to buy back that refined crude oil. We're not breaking even because when we initially sold that crude oil as a cheap raw material, we're using Nigerian nairas and we're buying it back in US dollars, meaning that we're not breaking even, meaning that we have to borrow more from the World Bank in order to produce more in order to pay back the debt. So we're caught in this endless cycle, for example. If you're in Kenya, the country is currently running over 90% on renewable energy, and Kenya is one of the top 10 most developing countries across the African continent. and they're not using fossil fuels, right? They're using renewable energy. So that's also like a really great blueprint or an example of a country that can actually use renewable energy to actually unlock different developmental pathways. Another example where we can talk about how renewable energy does not really, fossil fuels does not really foster development. I think we've answered that, but your question is, will it slow down? The question you need to ask yourself again is Africa actually industrializing? Because currently, because of how we are structured as a continent, it's very difficult to industrialize. How do you industrialize if, first of all, we are not in charge of our natural resources? Even if you look at the fossil fuel companies that are currently running in Africa, Total owns most of the gas sites, Shell, Sasol, BP. So essentially, we're not in charge of our natural resources as well, meaning that everything that is produced is exported, right? If we look at the manufacturing or supply and manufacturing chain across the African continent, I'll use Zimbabwe, for example. When Zimbabwe got its independence, that was well on the way to industrializing. But because of how the Bretton Woods system is structured and the notion around loan conditionalities and debt fundamentally stopped it, and most of those industries have shut down, which is why there's this new form of thinking called the Green Industrialization Framework for Africa. And it's a little bit complicated, right, to understand, but just to be very, very frank with you and very direct in terms of how we could ideally understand that, is really creating a new energy system that could fundamentally usher in Africa's promised developmental pathways by essentially tapping into the critical or transition minerals as promised. Because what we are trying to propose out of this industrialization or green industrialization framework is how can we convert Africa into renewable energy hubs? You forget that we as a continent house 60% of the resources need to industrialize, to power the next phase of the new energy system as we know it, which is renewable energy. And 60% of that is currently owned and governed in Africa. So the green industrialization framework would be to position Africa to leverage its critical minerals in order for it to become a renewable energy hub through different ways, right? That we could really touch on. But remember, the chromium, the manganese, lithium, the copper, the iron, and steel, all of these needed to accelerate energy transition and foster development needs to be done through a South-to-South collaboration, and all these resources are currently needed in Africa. As I mentioned earlier on, Africa cannot reproduce the extractive economic model that destroyed our economic systems and resulted in food and energy insecurity, poverty, social exclusion, conflicts, as well as economic and ecological destruction. So African economies have been locked at the bottom of the global value food chain since colonial times, and we cannot continue to be the continent that provides cheap raw materials for others to feed their industrial development while we're also tackling a climate emergency. And to deal with the current climate crisis and the development challenge in Africa, we will need to tap on the existing potentials, which is the abundance of our renewable energy resources and our green minerals, to establish economic and climate resilient systems. And this resilience is grounded on creating an ecosystem in Africa that would help the continent prepare itself for its role with regards to not only just these critical transition minerals, but also the ongoing debate around industrialization and just transition, which will require a synchronized effort to enable the operationalization of climate systems and economies in Africa to become well equipped to anticipate, withstand, and even bounce back from any type of climatic or economic shock. And in order for us to develop this, we need to deliver economic justice that will unlock a transformative people-centered energy systems to African people. Our leaders must put then in place a very long-term strategic plan for Pan-African industrialization process that leverages these complementary resources and capabilities in order to manufacture, to deploy clean energy, clean cooking, clean transportation, public infrastructure, and the building blocks of development and prosperity for the continent. I mean, to use a very bad example, think about it this way. Say you're all in a village and you are the only one with maize meal. But at the same time, you do not have the power to make decisions within that village. Doesn't make sense. That's currently where Africa is at. We have all the necessary resources. That means we have the power, and the cards are essentially on our desk, but we just need to find the right way to play those cards while also paying close attention to the emerging climate politics, right, that are at hand, and international relations as we understand that, using a very orthodox sense of it. So I'll stop there. Thank you, Seble, and I hope your question has been slightly answered. But I will suggest that you also visit the justtransitionafrica.org website. There's a lovely blueprint report around that will help you really understand that that question. I'll plug it in. Back to you, Seble.
Thank you so much, Dean, for sharing. I think, yeah, it's really important to highlight that we haven't achieved industrialization from fossil fuel extraction. As Dean was saying, we export raw materials, we import the refined products. We're constantly experiencing trade deficits because of this, importing debt and importing inflation. And we want to have a new scenario, and we hope that this can happen via a just transition. So Dean is going to plug the link into the Just Transition Africa report, which is a really helpful research that's done by many friends across the continent. And I saw that we're at the top of the half hour, but I will just try and answer 2 or 3 more questions I saw from Stephanie. That as much as we want the fossil fuel treaty, there's communities that depend on fossil fuels. So what are some of the transitions that will be put in place so as to help these people? So with that first question, the fossil fuel treaty does not propose an overnight shutdown of fossil fuels. This is a managed and fair, equitable phase out of fossil fuels. And it means that the world's richest countries that have created the climate crisis are the ones that need to stop the extraction first and fastest. Countries like Canada, the US, the UK, Australia, Norway, these really big producers are the ones that need to shut down their production first and fastest, but give support. We're demanding in this transition that there be financial support and technology transfers to the most dependent communities and countries to make that transition possible. On the graph I showed earlier, there's countries like Iraq where 90% of their national revenue comes from oil. If they don't have an international framework and finance and technology, that transition is impossible. So it's precisely because we do not want communities and people to slip through kind of the social support that we are proposing an international framework that's grounded in justice and equity to make that transition possible. So again, it's not an immediate stop of the extraction, it's a fair phase out and a transition. And in terms of the enforcement and accountability mechanisms to have compliance around the treaty, we're currently developing kind of the legal pathways around the treaty, if this happens inside the UN, outside of the UN, to create a legally binding treaty, and looking at historical treaties like the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, on substances that deplete the ozone layer, on landmines, on chemical weapons, to kind of have a sound framework that can get us there and ensure that there's compliance on stopping expansion and holding kind of the biggest polluters accountable. And I see that Rahmina has also put another response in the chat. That's wonderful. And then the last questions that I see is, how can we build a strong coalition of youth leaders from marginalized communities to amplify their voices and demands for climate action, and what role can we play in supporting their efforts? So I don't know if Rahmina or Orieny, you want to take that question. In the meantime, I'll put some of the links in the chat and just share one more thing when we close. So Rahmina or Orieny, do you want to take the question from Charity that I just read?
Yes, I want to take it. Can you please read it again?
Yeah, the question is, how can we build a strong coalition of youth leaders from marginalized communities to amplify their voices and demands for climate action? And what role can we play in supporting their efforts?
Thank you. I can see it. It's at 4:30. Yeah, so Charity, as young people, we are always talking about unity and working together, building networks. And in this meeting or in this intro session, we have over 80 people who've been sharing links there. So that's just starts with collaboration and partnership. There's no need to compete in the climate space. And even here in Africa, one of the problems that we are having in the climate space is we are competing for the same funds, we are competing for attention and all that. And I find that counterproductive. We have capability of working together. And this intro session is just an example of what happens if we work together and see that our cause is the same. So apart from that, there is other ways of engaging. In terms of like amplifying voices, the marginalized communities. There are several campaigns that are going on right now across Africa. There's Don't Gas Africa by Shift Africa. There's the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty. There's Break Free from Plastics. There is the Loss and Damage Youth Coalition that is currently running micro grants and other capacity building sessions. And there are others that I can't list all in this call. So one thing that there's a member who suggested that we have a WhatsApp call for a WhatsApp group or maybe Telegram. I don't know how we are going to work on that, where we can communicate and share opportunities. So that is a good opportunity to connect with fellow Africans and to see how we combine our actions. Finally, on what role youth can play in supporting their efforts. So we know how huge social media is globally, and even right now in Africa, the role it's playing in bringing out issues like the other day, fossil fuel. Fridays for Future Africa was running a campaign on a free DRC and shedding light on what's going on the ground there. I saw so many young people adding their voice on that campaign, and I'm sure it caught some attention of some people, and is going to contribute to the systemic transformation that we need. The problem in Africa is not just a one-time problem. We can't solve it with a silver bullet. That's why we need a number of things working together and symbiotically to bring change. And I think Seble mentioned that the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty is an additional tool that is needed to help champion or to help push the Paris Agreement agenda to 1.5 degrees Celsius, below 1.5. So my point is, we need to come together to find these solutions and to collaborate when these solutions are presented to us or when we develop them as young people. Right now, in a few weeks or a few months, there are going to be a lot of Conference of Youth heading to Conference of Youth and COP29. Not all of us can make it to COP29, but some of us can. Those who can should share the resources that they get in these conferences with other young people so that they are not only informed but empowered. And if there is a fundraising opportunities or you see an opportunity for funding, as a person, I can't apply for all of them. So I have to share those opportunities. So sharing is a good thing in even in the climate space. And I believe that if we work together, we can achieve more than if we work in silos. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Orieny. And I see there's still more questions coming in. Please put them in the chat and I'll send a response email to everyone with the links that we've shared today and the presentation so you can have them. And I just wanted to close with some final information. So this upcoming Saturday is Africa Liberation Day, and with Fridays for Future Africa and Fridays for Future Kenya and Don't Gas Africa and also the Fossil Fuel Treaty campaign will be helping to host screenings of the Shifting Power documentary that Dean can share a little bit about. And these screenings will be taking place in 12 different African cities in Nigeria, Kenya, DRC, Sierra Leone, Uganda, Botswana, Cameroon, Zambia, and Tanzania. And we're just working to finalize the comms packs now and all the graphics. And I'll share that again also to your lists so you can have all the information and hopefully attend if it's happening in the city where you live. And I just wanted to give a space, maybe 30 seconds to Dean, if you want to tell everyone what is Shifting Power and what it's all about. I'll put a link to the trailer in the chat, but maybe you can just tell everyone what the documentary is all about and why they should go find a screening on Saturday.
Thanks, Seble, for that. So the Don't Gas Africa, Shifting Power is a documentary that is 5 months old, essentially. It premiered at COP28 and also at the European Parliament. It is essentially through a cinematic journey, right? It really provides this different lens of different lived experiences across the African communities in terms of lived experiences and how, people are trying to reshape their lives, given the gas boom, essentially. So the documentary, to a large extent, tries to not only capture the narrative around affected communities, but also tries to provide a humane perspective around the socioeconomic and environmental upheavals that these communities face as a result of fossil fuels. So we shot in 5 countries, which is Kenya. Not that there were fossil fuels in Kenya, but Kenya, because of the Save Lamu case, it was a brilliant example in terms of struggles that have been successful. We showed in Uganda because of Stop ECOP, in Senegal because of the Dash for Gas in Senegal. We showed in Nigeria. And then the 5th country was Cameroon, because it's a big pipeline that's going to tear down that big, beautiful forest within Central Africa from Equatorial Guinea, Chad, right through into Cameroon as well. So I look forward to everyone getting time to actually view this. And just before you actually decide to go for the screening in your different areas, if you're in Nairobi on the 25th of May, this is going to be the African Development Bank March, which is going to be super amazing and very super important. Particularly, like I mentioned, the example for northern part of Kenya. It's moments like those where we actually step in and actually speak out and hold these development finance institutions who are mandated to actually eradicate poverty and really hold them accountable. So if you are around in Nairobi at 8 a.m. at GAYO Stadium, please do come around. There'll be some t-shirts, there'll be some food, and there'll be great people as well. And we look forward to connecting with you all. Bring a family, bring your child, bring your partner, bring everyone. It's really going to be such an amazing weekend. And it's my birthday as well. So lots of celebration to go around on that day. So I look forward to seeing each and every one of you at GAYO Stadium, 8 a.m. on Saturday. Back to you, Seble.
Thank you so much. It's exciting. There's so many in-person things happening. So we've shared the link to the trailer for the documentary. So hopefully you can all check it out. And when we send the recording and the presentations and all the links, we'll also add the locations of the screenings that will be taking place, like I said, in 12 different African cities on Saturday. I've put in the chat the links to join the youth space and also the Telegram group, and then we can figure out how we do it just for Africa if there's demand and appetite for that. And you can also join the youth space, and you can also sign the youth letter for Fossil Fuel Treaty. All the links are there. Thank you everyone for joining us today. You've been amazing, and it's been incredible to see how active this space is. Thank you to all the panelists that joined, to Dean, to Orieny, to Minta, to Rahmina, to Laura, to Kiki. Thank you everyone. Oh, Dean, your email is being requested, so let's put that in the chat if you can before we close. Otherwise, I'll also share that when we send the recap email. So I just want to say thank you to everyone, and we will hopefully see some of you on the streets of Nairobi and on Saturday. Otherwise, we hope to see you in the screenings taking place of Shifting Power on Saturday, Africa Liberation Day. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, Seble, and thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.